The Denver Broncos season is officially over, which now means that the search for the next head coach becomes the biggest priority in Broncos country. And the search is already heating up for this Broncos football team as the team has identified candidates they'd like to interview. Plus, what did players have to say after leaving the locker room on Monday? You get that and much more. Today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos.
You are Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, Broncos country? Welcome into a brand new episode, Locked on Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Just want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country who tunes in and makes Locked on Broncos their first listen of the day every single day. Whether you listen on your favorite audio podcasting platform, we're available for you free and everywhere you get your podcast. Or if you watch us in beautiful 4K high definition, we have you covered on YouTube as well. Thank you so much. From the South Stands to the end zone, I'm your host, as always, Cody Roark, Broncos reporter from Mile High Sports, joined alongside, as always, by my co-host and my good friend, Sayre Bedinger, site expert, predominantlyorange.com. Sayre, we enjoyed Victory Monday. Oh, absolutely. Yes, we did, right? And it was good for the Broncos to end the season on a positive note. But now, with the season being officially over, that means the head coaching search is ramping up. And on Monday, the Broncos wasted no time submitting their formal request to interview specific candidates that they'd like to interview for the vacant head coaching job. It is about to get real in Broncos country once again.
It's about to heat up. It's heating up, as a matter of fact, as we sit on Victory Monday recording, as we get ready to talk about the week that is to be, as you know, the NFL, really a lot of teams getting some action in terms of maybe letting go of head coaches, maybe moving on from general managers. We've seen teams all around the league starting to make moves, big ones at that, but the Denver Broncos, we know, are ready to make some big waves, Cody. We obviously heard over the weekend, everybody's read and heard about the Sean Payton stuff. Even Sean Payton, with that interview that he did with Peter Schrager on Fox, they're very, very insightful and admitted to already talking to Broncos ownership, but not a formal interview just yet. He's talked to the ownership. We'll see what happens, but important to make these distinctions here and now. So ultimately, Cody, what it comes down to is right now the Broncos seem to have a list of 6 head coach candidates, and going from top to bottom in no particular order, just the order in which they come off the top of my head right now. Sean Payton, who's obviously under contract with the New Orleans Saints right now. Jim Harbaugh, who's under contract at Michigan with the Michigan Wolverines program, but he will be interviewing. Ejiro Evero, the current Broncos defensive coordinator, right? And his former boss, Raheem Morris, the defensive coordinator of the Los Angeles Rams. And then you have maybe the hottest potential first-year head coach candidate, DeMeco Ryans, the current defensive coordinator of the #1 defense in the NFL there over in San Francisco. And then to round things off, the familiar face, Dan Quinn, the defensive coordinator of the Dallas Cowboys, interviewed for the Broncos last year once, was about to interview a second time, but the team opted for Nathaniel Hackett. Cody, I feel like this is it's not an expansive list, but it's a very well-decorated one.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people in Broncos country, a lot of fans have been wrestling with the thought, like, how many people should Denver interview? In my opinion, I don't think you have to interview more than 10, right? I think you need to narrow the list down to the top 7, top 8 candidates, right? And you figure out, okay, these are the people we want to interview. And I think it is good that the Broncos are interviewing more than just what everybody's like, okay, Sean Payton or Jim Harbaugh or bust. Neither. We don't want anybody else. Like, I know a lot of Broncos fans are set on either Payton or Harbaugh. But I think it's also important that, as I've mentioned on the show a multitude of times, the big-name guy may not be the best man for the job in Denver. And I think everyone gets so caught up, and this isn't just with coaching, this is with free agency, this is with the NFL draft, but the reality is, who is the best fit for the team? And I hope that the Walton Penner family ownership group exhausts every option to figure out who the right person for the job is, right? But you mentioned Ejiro Evero. He's going to get the first crack at interviewing for the head coaching job, which is great. And speaking of players, like we talked to Draymond Jones on Sunday after the game, and he said that Evero would be a great head coaching candidate. Josie Jewell had nothing but great things to say about Evero and said he's a tremendous leader, knows how to lead a football team, knows the families personally of the players, like gets to know the families of the players. Like that's important, right? But as we have seen, he's also a pretty damn good play caller on the defensive side of the ball. So there is that. You mentioned DeMeco Ryans. I mean, I think he's probably been the hottest name, and he probably will be outside of like Sean Payton and Jim Harbaugh. DeMeco Ryans probably is the hottest name right now in the National Football League and for a potential head coaching gig. He might be the favorite to be a first-year head coach somewhere. Will it be Denver? Maybe. I think they're going to go through the interview process and see that. You mentioned Raheem Morris as well. Obviously, a lot of familiarity with Ejiro Evero. So maybe if Raheem Morris gets the job, he's the head coach, he keeps Evero on as DC. I mean, there's so many different things we have to look at with this because it's a shuffle. There's going to be a lot of changes on the coaching staff for this Broncos team regardless. And then you mentioned Dan Quinn. Obviously, they submitted a request to interview him with the Dallas Cowboys. They will be playing on Monday Night Football next week in the wild card round against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So we'll see how things go. I don't imagine... I'd be intrigued. I'd be shocked if Jerry Jones allows the Broncos to interview Dan Quinn this week. I imagine it might be something that happens next week. But Denver has begun the process, Sayre. And once again, I always think, and I encourage Broncos country to evaluate every option, right? Don't get set on just one person, right? Think about maybe, okay, what might it look like with this person? And I know fans are hesitant about another potential first-year head coach because of past experience, but you can't let the fear of striking out keep you from playing the game, my friend. I'm a big believer in that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think to your point, you look across the league at some of the best teams and some of the best coaches in the league. Those guys were first-time head coaches when they got hired. It wasn't like every good team in the NFL has a retread option at the head coach, So I think there's the Andy Reids of the world, an excellent retread option when the Chiefs hired him from the Eagles. Likewise with the Jacksonville Jaguars landing Doug Peterson in what was a shambles of an interview process for them last year. You remember that? It just felt like they were so discombobulated and they somehow stumbled into maybe the best coach of last year's circuit. And there's different, Kyle Shanahan, he was a first-time head coach. Sean McDermott, Buffalo Bills. You could go up and down the list of teams right now, Cody, that are the best in the NFL. Philadelphia Eagles, obviously, with Nick Sirianni. So it's not an exact science, but I get where Broncos fans are coming from. You had 3 first-time head coaches in a row. You want to see somebody with experience go in there. But look, how great of a job have we seen Jerry Rosburg do? I know he's a veteran coach of the NFL, but he was a first-time interim coach, and it seemed like he did quite a good job in just 13 days' time. So what I'm saying there is you can't necessarily look at these candidates in terms of, well, DeMeco Ryans doesn't have any head coaching experience. He's off the table for me. I think his experience as a player, a former player, is almost just as valuable as any guy coming in who's a previous head coach, right? So I think there's a lot to be spoken for in terms of these candidates. Only 2 offensive guys, those being the 2 biggest names, Harbaugh and Sean Payton, number of defensive guys out there. It's going to be fascinating to see how it develops, Cody. And, of course, you and I will be talking about it every single day.
Yes, we will, until there is a solution in place. When the Broncos have their next head coach, then we can ponder other things here. But this is going to be the hottest topic right now in Broncos country. Obviously, free agency is approaching as well. We'll tackle all that here on Locked On Broncos. 4 of those coaches on the list, as you mentioned, do have prior experience, which means that, okay, their preferred candidates do have experience, but the guys that don't have previous head coaching experience, I feel like, Sayre, they could be outliers in this situation. Not in a bad way, right? But they could be a wild card that really changes the way that the Walton Penner family ownership group views maybe the direction they want to head with this Broncos team. And they've had an up-close and personal experience with Ejiro Evero this season. I'm very excited to see what happens in this coaching search. And regardless, whoever the Broncos hire, I do believe it will be the right person. Whoever they choose, there's a reason why they will get hired, and we'll break it down here on the podcast. But you know what, Broncos country, the Broncos season has officially ended, and we were able to go and speak to players as they were cleaning out their lockers on Monday at the UC Health Training Center. What did we learn, and what did various Broncos players learn about this season individually, personally, and as a team? We'll dive into that on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends at PrizePicks, and PrizePicks is daily fantasy sports done right. And with the PrizePicks app, you choose 2 to 5 players that you're focused on heading into the week. These players will have a projection that's set by PrizePicks, and you simply choose whether or not they will have more or less than their PrizePicks projection, which could allow you to win 10 times your money on any entry. There's no competing against other people. It's just you versus the projections that are available. So download the PrizePicks app or go to PrizePicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. Don't forget to enter promo code LOCKEDON at sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100. And our friends at TurboTax. Go to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Meet with an expert who will do them for you. TurboTax experts can relieve you from the stress of taxes and file for you so you can do not taxes. Show your eyes things that are not taxes. Unpack a moving box of not taxes. Taste not taxes. Sing not taxes a lullaby. Hope not taxes sleeps through the night. Grab a saddle and ride not taxes into the sunset. With TurboTax, an expert will do your taxes from start to finish, ensuring your taxes are done right, guaranteed, so you can relax. Feels good to be done with your taxes, doesn't it? Come to TurboTax and don't do your taxes. Visit TurboTax.com to learn more. Intuit TurboTax. Full service products only. Video meeting while expert does your taxes required. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. All right, Sayre, continuing on today's episode, Locked On Broncos. Just want to say thank you so much to everybody in Broncos country who's tuned in to Locked On Broncos every single day, making us your first listen of the day for all the fresh and latest up-to-news content on all things Denver Broncos related. We are the place for you because for the true fan, there is never an off season. Sayre, continuing on with today's episode of the show, we just dove into potential head coaching prospects. Obviously, as the Broncos formulate their list of candidates that they have requested permission to interview, some that they will interview. We will find out, I think, maybe in a month or so, what the whole ordeal is. Hopefully before the Super Bowl, because I'll be out in Phoenix for Super Bowl week, Radio Row, and I'm hoping that nothing happens prior to that. During that. That would be horrible. Hopefully it happens before. There, I corrected myself there. Outside of that, what are some things that we've learned about this season? I think it's important, and especially as we talk with members of Broncos country, I think this show and how we use it often at times, right? We break down what happens, right? And our analysis of players is never, ever personal, right? We talk about, okay, hey, they struggled. They didn't do this right. They didn't do this well. I want to rephrase that. I think it's so important, especially in today's media where the hot take or the clickbait is the easiest thing to do. What is something, and this is a question I was asking Broncos players. I want to ask you this, though. What is something that you have learned about yourself this year, Sayre, while covering this Broncos team?
That's a great question. I think, I'd love to be able to think about it before shotgunning it. But I think at the same time, one of the best things that we learn being in this spot that we are, which is such a privilege, is that it is a privilege, right? That we get to talk about the Broncos as a job. That's not taken lightly by either of us, right? This is something that I not to get too super deep, Cody, but I remember back in high school, I was putting together mock drafts. I may have told you this story before, but I would write them out on my notebooks, in between class and stuff, because I love talking about football. I love talking about this stuff. And I remember this one time a kid saw me writing a mock draft out, and he looks over my shoulder and he's like, why are you making a mock draft? And I was like, I love sharing my opinions on the draft. And he's like, who's ever going to want to read what you write about football? And I was like, oh, dang, I guess the challenge is on. So, that doesn't motivate me every day. That's not this chip on my shoulder, but it does remind me, when I think back to that, it reminds me what a privilege it is to go from, just jotting stuff down on the notebook to being able to do this professionally. I think that is one of the biggest things that I've learned personally in the last year of doing this with you and writing and all those different things, is that, man, we have such a privilege to be able to do this. And if you approach the job from that perspective, you're able to interact with people, even the people that, don't like what we say or disagree with us strongly, or maybe not very kindly at times. You learn how to deal with those things differently because you understand the seat that I'm in. It's a privilege to be in it. It's not that, I've stepped over all these people to get to where I am today and I have every right to be here. I think, a lot of times we just gotta kind of thank, our lucky stars and count your blessings, whatever you do, and really just reflect on how you got to where you are. And the fact that, you're there because you worked hard. So stay humble in it.
I think what you said is spot on there. And you know, for like what we do, one thing I've really learned about it this year, especially being on location and being at practice, being in the locker room every day and talking to players, talking to, you know, to other media members, you never know who's listening or you never know who's watching or reading the stuff that you put out there. And I always think that's something that has stood out to me because, you know what, like players are going to see things. Like there are people who, you know, send things to players like, hey, you know, did you see that these guys wrote this awesome thing about you? Like people see that, right? And it puts attention on you. But more importantly, I think the one thing I've learned about myself, especially covering the Broncos and covering the NFL, like I try to bring the information that I know that I learn being on location every day. I try to bring that to fans because far too often, as I alluded to earlier, we often see clickbait. We see false information being put out there, and it spreads like wildfire. And it's like the low-hanging fruit that you see so many people say in responses, and it's almost to a point where it's so scripted that, you know, sometimes we'll get a comment, I'm like, oh, I know exactly where you heard this from. And the reality of the situation is people spread that stuff here. I always try to bring perspective. I have conversations with players, and you know what I've learned about myself in sports media. My job is to be able to analyze the game of football. I got into this because I love football. Sayre, football saved my life. If it wasn't for football, I'd probably be dead or in jail. 110% honest with you there. And for me, like, I love the game so much. So when I cover these athletes, I see how much they love the game. Talking to these guys, I see how much they love the game. And it's like, well, I can talk about, okay, you know, they didn't perform well, and, you know, they missed this block, or they, you know, they dropped this pass, whatever it may be, or they missed this tackle. That's fine, right? That's fair. That's in bounds. But for me, it's like I also care about what these athletes do outside of football. I've had the opportunity this year to develop some really great relationships with a lot of players in that locker room. And I just have such a newfound respect for them because, yeah, I mean, you see athletes on TV all the time, and everyone's like, oh, you know, these guys are athletes. They get paid so much money. You know, they're kind of like superhero status, right? And, you know, we see a lot of fans get starstruck, which is really awesome. But getting to know what these guys love outside of football, what they do, like getting to know their family members as well. Like I've had the chance to get to know some family members of certain players, and it's been a really cool thing because you get to learn why, you know, the type of human beings that these guys are. My goal is to continue to humanize pro athletes, right? Because this industry, as you and I both know it, we see it in written form, we see it in audio form. It is very dehumanizing to a point where it's like, all, you know, you need to get me a high fantasy score on my football team or else, you know, you suck. Like you see people tweet stuff like that all the time. It's different. I want to be able to use my platform to allow athletes to tell their stories, you know, on their platforms and whatnot. So for me, that's something I've learned about myself. And I've learned about how resilient that this locker room really is, Sayre. And that's something I want to touch on as we continue to talk about it on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. The Broncos were obviously at the team facility on Monday morning, cleaning out their lockers as they prepare for the offseason. And for Denver, 18 unrestricted free agents. You have various players, various coaches on the staff that do not know what the future holds. And so with that, we'll dive into some learning lessons that we got from players on Monday in the Valley as they exited the locker room for one last time this season. You'll get that on today's episode, Lockdown Broncos. This episode of the show is brought to you by our friends at BetOnline.net. BetOnline.net is your number one source for sports betting info, stats, news, and analysis. Get the latest odds and trends for every professional and amateur league out there, from pro football to college bowl season to basketball and the World Cup. We've got it all at BetOnline.net. And if you love sports podcasts, you can even find those at BetOnline as well. We're always the fastest and the easiest way to get your betting info, so head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more. BetOnline, where the game starts. What did we learn from various players in Broncos country after the 2022 NFL season? Sayre, part of the exit interview strategy, you know, for every football team that's eliminated, you go through, you have your morning breakfast as a team, you go through your team meetings. Obviously, players have to go through and they have to do like end of the year physicals and whatnot. And then you get a talk, you know, the media gets like, I think 45 minutes to an hour to be able to be in the locker room to talk to guys, interview guys as they go on their way out. And, you know, I asked the question to several players, and I'm going to start off with one guy I talked to Sunday after the game in the locker room. I asked Andrew Beck, right, fullback. I mean, this is a guy who is like a modern-day Tim Riggins, loves football. I mean, this guy loves football so much. And talking to him, I just asked him, I was like, what is one thing you learned about yourself this season? What is one thing that stands out to you, even though that the year did not go how you guys had hoped for? And he told me, he said he was having a conversation. His wife asked him, what is something that he's learned a little bit as well about himself this year? And like, how has he managed to go through the season through the eyes of an NFL player? And he said, for everything that we have been through this season, he said, I can honestly look in this locker room and I can look at these guys and say, I absolutely love these guys, and that we stuck together despite everything, despite all the outside noise, despite a lot of the changes. Andrew Beck told me that he's never been close with guys the way he has been with every guy in this locker room, on offense, on defense, on special teams, that they are kind of like it's us against the world type thing. And Sayre, I think ultimately that is one of the most important things that you can highlight when it comes to talking about these players. It summarizes it, stuff that fans don't get to see, right? They look at, wins and losses and like, this year was terrible. Players are disappointed about the outcome of this year. But I think the one thing that I certainly understand and I resonate with is that these guys really love and care for each other, which is great because it's not many times you see that in a locker room. And he says often at times when you're winning, it can mask a lot of those things. He says, when you're losing, you really learn about who you are and what type of teammates you have. And he says, I have the best teammates in the world.
I think, Cody, to kind of vamp off that a little bit, doesn't that speak to the job done by Nathaniel Hackett and something specifically that Justin Outen pointed out about relationships that, were needed repair in the locker room? And when Hackett was let go, Outen addressed the media a couple days later, and he mentioned that specifically, that he put forth some healing in the locker room that needed to be done. And so I guess if nothing else, kudos to Hackett for creating that environment in the locker room, to really being that guy who we knew coming in. He's a player's coach. He cares about the families. He cares about, what you did last night. Even if nothing else, that's a kudos to him. But I think also for the players to be able to stick with it, right? Because at the end of the day, it would be easier to just get frustrated about losing, wouldn't it? It would be easier to get frustrated about, our quarterback's making $245 million, and here we are putting in all this work and pitting players against quarterback. And we did hear some reports of that, throughout the season. But for them to be able to stick together and stick it out through the end of this season, and really the overwhelming vibe that I got from watching tweets that you and others put out as you interview players in the locker room during that exit time, the overwhelming sense that I got is that these guys, even the guys that are projected free agents like Andrew Beck or Deshaun Williams or other players, it seems like the overwhelming sense is that they kind of want to be back together, which I think speaks exactly to what you said.
Well, and talking to some guys too, guys that are going to be unrestricted or restricted, they're like, we want to finish things out here. I want to see us turn things around here. And I know Russ had something post-game on CBS. He said, we're going to turn this around. When we do, it's going to be an amazing story, which I do believe that, we've seen it with this Denver team. They can play well. They can do the things I think we expected and that we foresaw initially, and they just have to do it more consistently. But I think also another matter is good coaching, helping corral that, I think matters. And we've saw that, from this Denver team the last 2 weeks. There's another story I want to tell kind of behind the scenes, right, about just the dynamic of this team. You know how often at times rookie guys, they go out and they have to get vetted with like a $53,000, $28,000 bill, something along those lines sometimes. I mean, I was talking with Jalen Virgin. I just said, what have you learned about yourself, right? That was the question I wanted to ask everybody, because I think to me, like, that was something I wanted to know. What did they learn about themselves through the season that can help them going forward? It was a learning lesson for everybody. And Jalen just talked about, hey, this is truly a day-by-day league. And he said, the one thing I've learned is that, these guys in this locker room, they have my best interest. Like, for example, he said guys like Tim Patrick, Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, they take care of the other guys, the other wide receivers on the roster. Like, they never put them in a situation like that, that we see happen around the NFL far too often. He said they include them in everything that they do, and they have these meetings. Like, it is a brotherhood between them. And I will say this too, I think Tim Patrick deserves so much credit for some of the things going on this season, right? He suffered a brutal injury in training camp, and there's a whole mental process that comes with the ACL recovery. I talked to him about that, but the thing that I learned about Tim is just how big of a mentor he has been in that wide receiver room this year for guys. He's always been available. I mean, he's almost kind of been like another coach for Coach Azzani. And I think that's a testament to the type of room that those guys have. And I'm excited to see Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, Tim Patrick, KJ Hamler next year. I think all guys coming into the offseason are going to be extremely healthy. I think this is going to be the first time we're like, okay, hey, you know what? We're going to see some exciting things here from Denver. And I hope it can actually pan out to fruition this year, Sayre. But for me, my biggest takeaway is that despite how bad the season has gone, it went how none of the players, not you, not me, not any of the fans had expected. And they went through some hell. Like, they dealt with some stuff behind the scenes. Obviously, all the drama, all the outside national media noise, that can creep into a locker room a little bit. But these guys rallied together. They stayed together. And I think that's probably one silver lining you can pull out of this season is the fact that you do have a locker room that isn't fractured. And I think for any coach that's going to come into the situation, and granted, you're going to have a majority of the guys back. You're going to have a lot of guys that are questionable to return based on their free agency status. To me, I don't think you have any worries about trying to redefine a culture, right? I don't think you need to change the locker room culture, right? The only culture that needs to be changed is winning games. Denver has to get back to that. But I don't think all the other stuff that makes the locker room how it is with the guys and the leaders that you have there, I don't think you have to change any of that at all. I think Denver's in a very good spot.
Yeah, Jerry Jeudy said it, right? When he was defending Russ on Twitter, he's like, all this stuff is coming out because we're not winning games. And when we start winning, let's see how it is. I mean, when the Broncos start winning, Cody, I'll speak that into existence. The high knees on the airplane is going to be beloved by everyone, and it's not going to be memed by everyone. All these different things, these things that made the Broncos almost cringeworthy to so many people in 2022 are going to all of a sudden make this team, fun and beloved. Just imagine if Russell Wilson were doing the same Hy-Vee and State Farm commercials as Pat Mahomes and the Broncos were losing games. It would be the same type of situation. So we get it. The Broncos have to go out and start winning games. That, like you said, Cody, is the culture that needs to be changed. But the players, they're on board for it. You have to have, in any organization, you have to have people that are willing to buy into the vision, right? You have to have people that are willing to, what did John Elway once say when they were recruiting free agents to come to the Denver Broncos, right? He's like, I want players who want to be Denver Broncos. And I think that sentiment, although slightly different now, is exactly what you need for this team going forward. You need players that buy into the rich history of the team, that want to make their mark and pass on or continue to carry that torch of legacy of what the Denver Broncos stand for. There's a lot of other teams in the NFL that, hey, you want to go make your money with the Cleveland Browns? Go ahead. And all due respect to the Cleveland Browns, the Denver Broncos are a rich tradition of winning. It's a city in the NFL with 3 Lombardis in the team facility, right? This is not it's not another situation of, well, this is just another rebuilding team and this is just another sorry NFL franchise. No, this is a proud franchise, and these players, they understand that when they come into the building, there's something different about Denver. You see it with so many guys, right? They come to the Broncos at the end of their career, and all of a sudden they're retiring in Denver. They're sticking around in Denver. Peyton Manning did it. A number of other guys have done it. I mean, this is a proud franchise, a proud organization. And these players are buying into that rich tradition of winning. And I think that comes from, remember we talked about this last offseason, that winning tradition has to come from the ownership on down. Now we're starting to see that with the Walton Penner family ownership group. They're starting to bring that, and it's bleeding through the locker room. You love to see it. And I think that we are going to see a vastly different team next season.
I'm excited for what the season may bring, and you know what? We'll temper expectations. I think we expect the team next year to be better than what they were this year, but we probably won't create as much hype, right? We want to be kind of logical in the situation. I think the heat of the whole Russell Wilson trade and just thinking, right, because the narrative was Denver is a quarterback away. We thought, okay, they got the quarterback. Here we go, championship window. I think Denver can get back to there, but there's going to be so much change. There's going to be a lot of stuff structurally, on the coaching staff within the offensive scheme that I think is going to change. And we have to see who comes in as the next head coach of the Broncos. I think that'll give us a better idea as to maybe what we can expect in 2023. But one thing is for certain, Broncos country, every single day, all year long, we have you covered here, Locked On Broncos, because for the true fan, there is never an offseason. Thank you so much for rocking with us here today. Sayre and I will be back tomorrow to talk about some of the unsung heroes of the 2022 season for the Denver Broncos. Make sure you tweet us on Twitter at CodyRourkeNFL, at Sayre Bedinger, at Locked On Broncos. If you want to send in some of your candidates, we'll break it down in tomorrow's episode of the show here, Locked On Broncos.